Edith Marion Collier was born the 28th of March 1885 in Wanganui, New Zealand to Eliza Catherine Parkes, Henry Collier, a music shop owner and substantial landowner. She was the firstborn of 10 children. As her father owned a music shop, the family was incredibly musical. He encouraged all the children to enjoy his musical passion to the extent they formed a quartet in which Edith played the cello. They were also active members of the local Presbyterian church. In 1903 she started her art studies at the Wanganui Technical School. Throughout Edith's life she explored the medias of watercolor painting, printmaking, oil paints, pencil drawing. Her chosen subject matter was mainly focused on landscapes and portraits of people, both of which displayed both a great understanding of how color and form create what we see, and her quest to discover how to simplify and experiment with form, composition, and color to describe how we see. Edith was greatly encouraged by her family and her teachers. With her growing confidence, she moved to England in 1912 at the age of 27, to further her studies in art past the conservative and limited art education available in New Zealand at the time. As told by Joanne Drayton in her thesis, Edith Collier, Her Life and Work 1885-1964, she found her first few months touring and painting in Britain truly exhilarating. "I am just in full swing now," she wrote in a postcard to a brother, "never had such a time in my life, working all the time." Freed from family responsibilities, she lived a student life. Rooming with other young female students at Queen Alexandra's house and studied at the St. John's Wood School of Art and exhibited in the Art School Sketch Club. These classes proved to be conservative, much to her dismay, but she was able to find adventure and inspiration during summer-time tours around Britain. Edith would stay in the UK for almost a decade, working with other artists and teachers, touring throughout the United Kingdom, and created artworks in St. Ives, Cornwall, Glasgow, Scotland, Bonham, South Ireland, Wales, and more. During this time she studied with many mentors, including Margaret Macpherson and Frances Hodgkins. Joanne Drayton tells of how inspiration was instead provided by an Australian artist teaching in London, Margaret Macpherson, later Preston, who also became a good friend. In 1914 Edith Collier spent several weeks at Macpherson's summer art classes in Bonmayan, Ireland. She attended again in 1915, staying for 7 or 8 months. Her portrait studies of the local peasants and her paintings, prints and sketches of their dwellings, and of the dramatic scenery at Bonmayan, remain among her finest works. She lived on a stone cottage on the beach and the portraits painted here are described by Anne Kirker, in New Zealand Woman Artists, a survey of 150 years, as strong, sensitive characteristics, with bold coloring and unhesitant brushwork. Anne continues, the parallels between the way Preston handled color and composition at this period and Collier's approach become increasingly apparent, moving towards the modernist position of accepting that a picture is something that is constructed out of formal elements on a flat surface. Edith wrote home during this time, writing of her time with Margaret Macpherson, "I always feel as if I had learnt something when she comes. I have learnt more from Miss Mac than St. John's. It is an old-fashioned private school, very nice teachers, but it really is a bit out of date." In a letter sent to Edith Collier's mother from Bonmayan in Southern Ireland during 1915, Margaret Macpherson concluded, "I think you will be astonished at the quality of her work. I do not want to eulogize her because I am her teacher, but I assure you, she has an excellent talent in portraiture and ought to do well in New Zealand." But as the First World War raged on, this meant her brothers and cousins were fighting in Europe, and she often provided a place for them to stay when they were on leave, as well as organizing their mail and money. This, to Edith, was far more important than flying back home. Even though her parents tried to get her to return to the safety of New Zealand, through this time she was able to continue with her artistic creation and experimentation. As Joanne Drayton writes in her biography, she hired her own life models and continued to work and travel with Margaret Macpherson. While in London she exhibited mainly at women's art venues. Her first positive review came from the 1917 Society of Women Artists exhibition. When her work, Roxanne Bonmayan, was described as excellently composed and the forms are cleverly simplified. Edith Collier remained in Britain after the end of the war, and during 1918 and 1919, she worked mostly on her own. Anne Kirker writes, she painted her father's brother, Fred Collier, at his home in Cheshire and produced the highly accomplished Portrait of My Uncle. A strong sense of the personality of the elderly sitter comes through, straight couched in a style that pays particular attention to the interplay of color, shape and pattern. She also spent this time focusing on her craft alone, experimenting with new mediums and methods. In a letter to her mother, in 1920, she wrote, "I have just started doing monotype. You do it on copper, paint it on, you have to be very quick as the whole thing has to be done in half an hour or it is spoilt." Edith also took up printmaking in 1920, but encouraged by her family to return home, she left England in December 1921. In New Zealand, she quickly assumed the responsibilities of the eldest unmarried daughter. Nursing and helping family members meant she had limited time for her art. But the works she did create were born from her knowledge and vision, grown over 8 years away. And her vision and creations were now distinctly modernist, and in the times before the internet, modernist was not known to most people living in New Zealand during the 1920s. The art she exhibited often was not appreciated for her modernist approach, but her understanding of shape and form, and the overall aesthetic effect of the artworks, was still praised. In stark contrast to this praise, and the belief Edith's family and teachers had in her, Edith's own writings show a lot of self-doubt about her abilities as an artist. And whether the work she was doing was worthwhile. Thankfully, she continued to produce artworks. Although she has been overshadowed by other artists who were working at the time, her presence in both the New Zealand and London art scene stayed consistent over her time as a working artist. This is shown by the many art magazines and gallery catalogues that include her artwork. She continues to be remembered by New Zealand as one of our first modernist female artists, and many of her artworks reside at the Sargent Gallery in her hometown of Wanganui. After her time pursuing her artistic career had come to a close, she dedicated her time to caring for her family. Thank you so much for your time. I hope to make more videos like this in future. If you have any suggestions of other artists I could study and paint, please leave them in the comments, and I would love for you to like and subscribe. Many thanks to the incredible scholars, curators, family members of Edith Collier, the Sargent Gallery in Wanganui, and all of the writers, artists,